this final session on examining the techniques behind programming rhythms, what we're going to do is we're going to look at genres that encompass all of the techniques that we've discussed so far. Now, in the third session, when we discussed house and trance, I introduced you to the principle of subliminal movement, or filter and pitch modulation, if you will, and you witnessed just how important it is for programming drum rhythms. The slight movement of sound, whether it was filter or pitch, added that tremendous impact onto the rhythm as a whole, and it certainly allowed for more sustained listening. In the session that followed that, we built basically a small chill out loop, and that was to introduce you to a second technique that we know as ambiguous displacement. And with that, basically what we did is we moved some parts out of sync with the main pulse, or the tactus of the rhythm. And when the tactus was removed and our displaced rhythms played on their own, you could almost impose another pulse on that wouldn't have been in time with the original pulse. And then in the last session, just before this one, we built a fairly simple progressive house loop to introduce you to the theory of metrical dissonance. And there we basically introduced rhythms that were 3 beats long, but repeated them with 4 beats rhythms, so that the two moved in and out of time with one another. In a way, it could be viewed as we were working on cogs with differing numbers of teeth, which resulted in them moving out of time, then back in time with one another. Now, obviously, each of these techniques we've discussed so far can be applied to one another, but very generally speaking, what we tend to do is we tend to apply less of these techniques if it's to be accompanied by a strong melody. By that I mean, take house, club or trance, for example. Now, there's a proportionate amount of instruments that sit above the rhythms with those genres, and therefore we don't want to make the rhythms too complicated, because if we add too much shuffle or make them too complicated, it'll just confuse the track. So what you can say is, in general, that the more instruments that sit above the rhythms, the less complex you want to make them. And now we're going to move on to looking at tech house, minimal and techno. And as you know, these don't have an awful lot of instruments sat above them, and they rely mostly on drum loops. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that house, tech house, minimal and techno are the same genre. I don't want to give that impression at all. Basically what I'm saying is like when I mentioned house and trance, and progressive house and progressive trance, they are very different genres, but the techniques are used in both. It's the same here. Techno is completely different from minimal and tech house, just as tech house is very, very different from minimal and techno, and so forth. But while the genres are certainly different, they all employ the same techniques of subliminal modulation, metrical dissonance, and ambiguous displacement. Now, one thing I must state here is that these genres rely almost entirely on drum rhythms alone. The tracks are constructed from basically the evolution and production of both timbres and rhythms, and now obviously that's putting me in a bit of a predicament here, because to give complete, concise information on how to build loops from this genre, it would mean building a full track basically, and one, we don't have room on this DVD, and two, this isn't a DVD dedicated to how to build any specific tracks. We want to talk about rhythms here. So what I'm going to do is like in the previous sessions, I'm going to build a fairly simple drum loop using the techniques that tech house artists, minimal artists and techno artists use. And it will be a simple one due to how much time we've got, but it'll give you a general idea of how it all ties together and how they come up with their ideas. Now, generally speaking, tech house works in 2/4, but what we're going to do is we're going to remain in 4/4 for now. So I'm going to keep my time signature in 4/4, but just remember, if you're working in tech house, switch it to 2/4. It'll make it a little bit easier for you. So what we'll do first of all, I think we'll knock a kick in. I should mention this as well, actually, before I start knocking this kick in. This side chain here, all that is it's just a bounced kick from another project. All I've done is I've brought it in here because there's a trick that a lot of artists use in these genres that I'm gonna show you, and we're gonna need that side chain. But first, I'll put the kick in first. Let's just move this down. I don't imagine I've really got to explain much of what I'm doing anymore. you pretty much you've seen me do this countless times now over how many hours we've been working on all this, so I'll probably be a bit quieter as I do it. Let's find a nice rhythm for that. That's okay. Now what we're going to do here is I'm going to introduce you to a technique used by a lot of tech house artists and also by techno and minimal artists. And basically what they do is we had an audio track here. Let's get it there, and I just want to name this bass. Okay, now what we're going to do is I'll turn this down so I don't deafen you. What we're going to do, we're going to insert a test oscillator on this track. And then we're going to tune it right down. Just around 40 hertz. So we've got a nice deep. You can hear there. And then what we do is we introduce a noise gate there. And what we do is we use this side chain to trigger our noise gate. So what we do is we choose our side chain there, and then take that up, and what we do is we play it back now, and every time it hits a kick it opens the gate. So we just sort of fiddle around this, see if we can get a nice sound from it. What we need to do is just reduce the size of these little. So we take the front of this kick and mix it with the rear of this bass. That's sounding okay. I don't think we'll need this second. So no, we can basically get rid of that now. Get rid of that second kick, and what we'll do is we'll drop a snare in there. Again, I think you know the score here now. I'll make that a bit longer because snares usually have a longer. I quite like that. So, just throw. Then what we'll do there is we'll throw a bit of Filter Freak on that. We'll see what we can do with that. We'll use Filter Freak 2 for this one. Obviously it's a trim filter. We'll set that to our rhythm. Sounding bad at all, that. What we'll do is we'll throw a closed hat in with that. Let's just get a couple of notes in for a closed hat. quite like that one. What we'll do is, I think we'll go in there and we'll edit a bit out of this rhythm. Don't forget, we do want to introduce some displacement in here. So I think what we'll do is we'll make a very simple rhythm here. What we'll do is we'll just copy that, try that and just lengthen them a little. We'll throw a bit of echo boy on that, I think. What we'll do there, we'll highlight all them and we'll just continually loop, as we've done before. This hi-hat. I think what we'll do is we'll actually displace this rhythm now. If we take that and take that right there. Oh, that's a bit further. We'll take it to there. That's adding something there, you can actually hear that working. What we'll do is we'll get an open hat in. Same again, I mean, you've seen me do this 1,000 times. There. They're playing off one another. It's quite what we need though. Bring the SPL in on that. I quite like that. And we'll just let's give it quite a nice effect there. We'll put another hat in. And then what we'll do is we'll displace this one slightly, I think. Right there. And what we'll do is we'll go to we'll put one there. one open and one closed on that. It's probably going to have to run off 2 bars that, so knock that out slightly. That's it. Sounded quite well. There's some congas in here. Some genres I was listening to for minimal and tech were all using some congas. So I think what we'll do is we'll drop some of them in. Again, we're going to have to come up with a rhythm for this. What we'll do is too time that one. We need to everything slightly at a time. And again, we've got the time again here. And what we'll do is better taller than that. I think some echo bar might work wonders. Dual echo on that. Oops. freak to them. Change that to a half note, I think. Some echo boy. That's not sounding bad at all, that. We'll bring another snare in. What we'll do is make this quite ambiguous as well. We'll introduce it just before that beat. Reverb on that. What does reverse that to make it just suck up to it? See if we can. Okay, what I've basically done is I've just brought in a melody and a quick hit, just to help me work around and get an idea of where this loop's going. And what I've done, all I've done is, you see that I've just given it a basic mix down, to set a few levels, and if you listen back to it now, it's not a complicated rhythm, and basically I did want to avoid something too complicated, because I could easily spend the next 9 or 10 hours just playing around with this. But the two melodies I've introduced are basically just those. Now, turn this up. Now, one technique I do want to mention before we close this off, before we run out of room on the DVD, is basically the techno artist showed me this one. What we do is we send all these to bus 1, and we send this one as well to bus 1. What we do is I'll send them fully, set them on no output, and the same with this one, no output, send that to a bus. So we're now basically controlling the entire mix there, apart from the bass there, obviously. And what we do there now is we now send this out to another bus. Now on this bus, what we do is we knock in a audio damage. I believe it's called the automaton. and I was pointed to this. It was I think it was pumper there. And what you do is you play that back now, and you slowly send this bus to it. I mean, generally the effect there is that that bus can then feed to another bus, and then onto another bus, and then return to the original and feed to another bus, and basically that's how it all works. You can go into a bus, each with different effects, and you feed them backwards and forwards, which gives you the strange effects on there. Now, as I could mention there, I could easily spend another 9 or 10 hours on there. In fact, probably the best approach you can do when you're programming this genre is actually program the timbres as you write the genre, whereas I've used samples there in Ultrabeat. Basically, you put a Waldorf on every channel and program them one by one and build it up. But the point of this session and the others has been to show you how to get an idea of designing timbres and then how they're connected together when you build rhythms. And I think I've accomplished that here. I've shown you the importance of the different techniques that we can use to create our rhythms. Basically, we've looked at subliminal movement or the modulation, and we've used that here. We've also looked at ambiguous displacement, which again we've used here, and also metrical dissonance, which we've used here. And it's the three working together there that have produced that final rhythm. I mean, that's somewhat laid back. That's more minimal than the tech house. Tech house seems to have harsher timbres, but we've shown you the technique there. You've seen the technique of how it does go together. So what we're going to do now is, before I bring this DVD to a close, I would like to discuss compression on drums. So what I'll do is, the next session we'll have a look at how we can apply compression to drum loops and make them more powerful.